So hello and welcome to the DV Digest. My name is Brody and this is your monthly digest of insight from design verification leaders. Now, today we have our first repeat guest, Adiel Khan. Adiel is the director of Silicon at Kioxia, and he's also a passionate mental health support advocate. So this episode is a little bit different. We talk about the pressures that verification engineers are under that can lead to deteriorating mental health and stress. Adiel also talks to us about his mental health struggles and how he's managed to overcome a lot of the troubles that he was having. Finally, we talk about the mental health support systems that are out there at the moment and what we can do to help each other a little bit more. Hopefully this episode serves as an account of the stresses that DV engineers are under and what we can do to help ourselves and each other. I really hope you enjoy. So Adiel, obviously you've spent your entire career in the semiconductor industry. What's your experience been with pressures in verification teams and how that might impact one's mental health?
Hi Brody. It's a huge thing in our industry, and probably people talk about it in behind closed doors rather than upfront and honestly at the beginning, middle, and end of project cycles. And including myself, right, as part of running projects and running teams over the lifespan of that. It's how do you approach that topic? And as an engineer, do you know what's good for you in those areas of perhaps the first time you're going through that project cycle? And I think it's important we come into this sort of more of a wellness era, that as engineers we start to adopt and acknowledge how we can make ourselves more resilient to what's going on around us. That's a key factor. Let's start off with the uncomfortable truth, right? The uncomfortable truth is you do your design, you do your architecture, that's wonderful. You've got an idea as to what it should look like. You do your design, it matches your architecture is, and then teams will then throw it over the wall to the verification engineers, most companies. And then it's like, well, is it ready to go? Is it ready to go? Oh, we need to finish by this deadline. Oh, well, can you show us your trajectory as to how good it is so far? And then that's just the pressure starts to build. And the pressure starts to build. And what happens is, oh, the design changes halfway. Oh, we add this feature. Oh, we delete that feature. Oh, the market's changed. Oh, we're a startup. And all of a sudden we need to pivot and we need to do something completely different. Or the area of expertise is shifting. And so now we've got even less time to tell you whether the product's good to go. And it's squeezed towards the end. And then that pressure just builds and builds and builds. And it's the hardest part of what we're doing, right? I mean, this is a classic situation where a very famous computer scientist said, if the designers had all of the capacity, intelligence to design correctly, then they don't know where the bugs are because they wouldn't put them in. So, and the bugs are there and the issues are there. So you're giving that task to someone or multiple people to outsmart where the designer has done their work. That's a tough ask.
So how do you see that play out in companies? Is there emails being sent out saying we need to get this done by next week, you need to work over the weekend? How does this actually sort of impact people?
Yeah, so that's key. That's in different cultures and different companies obviously play it differently. And I've seen a whole gamut. Obviously, I worked sort of outside of companies as a sort of consultant, sort of support engineer for many, many years, decades, and I'd see lots of different projects, lots of different companies go through this cycle, this trend. And even now it is hiring in different. You see it as part of your hiring recruitment process as well. Is that we ask people, how do you cope with stress? What is your mechanisms when the projects are delayed, when the projects are, someone from the team leaves? What do you do? How do you cope with getting added to do more work? And you have to kind of understand where the person is coming from when they answer you. So a lot of people will say, "I'll work harder," right? And sometimes as humans, we have limited capacity as to what that means. And then from a cultural perspective, do you want to be in a company, in a team where everyone is expected to work harder all the time? Because there's very few occurrences that once you've done that work hard, that all of a sudden it relaxes and eases and goes back to the way it was, 3 projects ago. So that's a very it kind of takes engineering maturity to realize that work harder isn't necessarily going to get you through your troublesome times. Your coping mechanisms are what's going to get you there. And then to do that, you need to understand what your coping mechanisms are. And off the camera, you and I talked about some of our journeys, and I've had, for better or worse, all the extremes through my journey. I've had periods of where the projects were, let's say, so uninteresting and not exciting to me that I was going through phases of looking for excitement in a, not in a good and healthy way. That sort of classical, my world is over. I need to find something which is more meaningful to do. All the way up to the high ends of, that corticoidal curve that the corporate world starts talking about, the stress levels, and so not trying to not tip over. But you only know your tipping point when you go over. That's also an uncomfortable truth. And so being in that, tipping over and having to recover and recuperate. And now I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. But you have to be able to understand what are your coping mechanisms in both of those scenarios, those extremes.
If you don't mind, would you share your kind of experience with mental health struggles, and particularly focusing on, how you identified that you sort of needed help, and what was the first step that you took to getting that help?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I mean, obviously, I'm wearing sort of last a few, I guess, months or years ago, mental health awareness for men's suicide campaigns that went around, awareness campaigns. And it's one of the difficult things. I only really understood about mental health after being sent, fortunately, by my management on a mental health first aid training course. And then sitting in the course, you're kind of going through it, and they teach you about, the algae acronyms. I'll see if I can say that word. And they teach you about, how to recognize in your colleagues when they are going through situations, and they teach you about, how what it looks like upon family members. And they play very famous video about the big black dog, right? And I was sort of going through that with my other colleagues who were there, and I was sitting there going, I've been through some of those situations, right? I used to travel a lot for work, and I used to start getting, sweats for absolutely no reason. I used to start feeling really nauseous. I'd just start feeling as if, something from within me needs to escape. And it was the onsets of panic attacks. And I had several of them without even realizing what they were. And then it sort of culminated for me when obviously, we have our own challenges through life. But then at some point, being a South Asian man, we are predisposed to certain conditions. Heart disease is one of them. And for one of my things was I got rather large, very much overweight. And I thought for one night that was me. I was having a heart attack. Called, had the ambulance over, blue lights, said to my wife, make sure that the kids are okay. The ambulance will take me. And they rushed me in, did the ECGs, and it wasn't. I was absolutely no heart conditions, fortunately, for at that time. But what it was a massive panic attack, and I couldn't differentiate between the two of them. And the doctors afterwards said, well, that's quite normal, because the symptoms that your body was being exposed to were replicating what my brain had said I could feel when I'm having a heart attack. And so that kind of tips me over, I need to do something about this. Right? And then you start investigating, how does that, why did that, I mean, I'm just working away, I'm just doing my normal job. So it's not, it wasn't overly stressful, it wasn't overly thing, but then it's those kind of micro build-ups. And we talk about, small T and big T trauma, right? And these were just a build-up of small T traumas that happened over a lifetime, right? Or my lifetime. And so then I sort of started investigating, what can I do to get myself better, put myself back in a better place.
Where did that start exactly? Where did you look first when you were searching for sort of answers to what was going on within you?
Sure. So we're living in quite an interesting time now. So I mean, there's a whole industry just looking after you or looking after me that I'm completely unaware of, right? I'm just not aware of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Well, not even behind the scenes, but in that area of wellness. And so first of all, I was overweight, so it was like, okay, I need to get myself into the gym. I need to get a personal trainer. So the PTs will tell you, as an aging man, you need to have so much muscle. You need to start making sure that the percentage degradation of muscle every year doesn't occur. So you got to have these your macros, right? You've got to have this amount of protein, this amount of carbs. So that's fine. That's functional health. Get yourself fit. But that was my body, but not my mind. And then I said, well, what can I do to try and understand about what's going on in my head? And I said, well, okay, I live here in the Western world. I'll go to the GP. I'll get private GP. I'll get NHS GP. I'll see what they say. Fortunate enough to have access to good medical facilities. And at that time, also sort of trying to understand a little bit about neurodiversity. As engineers, rightfully or wrongfully, there are a lot of us are on various spectrums of some description, right? And like that, like myself, I went and said I have to understand, where do I fit on this spectrum? And I came out, and the answers were I'm, neurodiverse, and that contributes to how my brain works. That's just the way I am. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way it is. And then I said, okay, well, what's happening, and how do I control some of these things? And there's a whole industry around, just finished reading some books about breath work and how, the breath work specialists will tell you breathe 5.5 breaths per minute, right? So books about it, whole, religious mantras, philosophies around it. We start talking about, I was doing like Wim Hof exercises. My kids watched the BBC series, understanding what's happening there, and say, well, why does hot and cold exposure and breathing like that matter to the body and the brain, right? Um, and then the functional gut people will tell you, oh, your microbiome is 7 pounds. It's as big as your brain. You need to look after it. So there's this a whole sector around what you can do, and it's confusing for most people. It's overwhelming, right? But you have to pick bits from it to start to get involved, right?
I think that's a great point. Like, there's a whole academic and professional sector dedicated to improving well-being, and a lot of it, um, is supported by randomized control trials, Western medicine, and is provably effective. And just being curious about what's out there is, I think, super important. Um, what are the support systems available now? You mentioned you went on a mental health first aider course, and this taught you, maybe some self-awareness potentially. Is that very common at the moment, and what else needs to be done?
Sure, I don't think it is common. I think most engineers would, especially their taking engineers, are so worried about, have they done their, found all the bugs, done their coverage closure, got the reports out, done their timesheets, booking in their time into whatever system they're using, and doing all that. It's kind of, they forget that they exist outside of the work. I mean, forget's probably a strong word. But they have a life, right? And this is, again, a big word that you put yourself into the world, right? That wasn't there before you entered it. And that kind of journey that you entered into that career to attain progress and growth, and making sure that you do that growth for yourself, right? So obviously, in the Western world, I've got psychiatrists, I've got psychotherapists, I'll go and get support from them. There are, religious-based backgrounds. There are, obviously, Eastern philosophies from China, India. There's all the philosophies out in the Mayans and the North American, South American civilizations. And these traditions have been going on for thousands of years, and blending them now with an understanding of what they mean and how they mean. As engineers, we want to understand stuff. We want to know, why does that work, or why does it not work, right? And so I've used myself as a bit of a guinea pig to try and understand what works for me. Because what works for me isn't going to work, might not work for you, might not work for the next person, or it might be generic enough that it works for everyone. I'm not in a position of authority to say that, but I need to figure out what works for me, right? How does different types of breath work for me? What is it I've been doing that has been good and not being so good, right? I mean, as an asthmatic and I've got pulmonary diseases, I need to be very careful how I breathe. Now, why is that the case? Right? What are the genetic markers that make that happen? And then can I actually influence some of those as to how I eat, sleep, breathe, walk, work, think, do meditations, do prayers, do whatever it is I need to do to put myself and be the best version of me.
What about kind of verification managers and directors, and even senior engineers? What can they be doing in their teams to make sure, I mean, number one, that everyone's okay, but also that their team is more effective, I guess? What support should they be offering?
Yeah, so I always say that, irrespective of who it is, as a team lead, as a manager, as a senior engineer, as a director, whatever is your role, you want to be working with the best version of that person. That's the key, right? You didn't hire 50% of them, right? And then, I've always said, it's like, we in our industry, a lot of the things, methodologies, practices around how to get the best from teams comes from sports industry, right? And it's the elite athletics and the elite of what happens, and some of those other then morph into what we're doing, right? And so you start looking at it, says, well, they pick your favorite football, cricket, national team, and they'll be the same favorite nail team, but the players change over decades, over years. The players come and go, right? And that's often a misnomer in companies that they say, "Oh no, I'm building a family." No, you want to build an all-stars team, and you want the all-stars to be allowed to develop and grow, and move on if they want to, or stay if they want to. Right? That's their choice. But you're building the all-stars, and the all-stars, you want them to always be the all-stars. So recognizing each person's deficiencies and skills and helping them flex. So we say, these different parts of the verification process, right? We talk a lot about the stress towards the end of the project. Now, for some neurodiverse people, or for some people generally, the beginning of the project is very stressful because all the requirements are up in the air. Nothing's solid. Now, what do you want me to build? What do you want to verify? I don't know. Well, you haven't even decided what the architecture looks like, and you tell me to write my verification plan on my strategies. And that can be quite daunting to some people, but understanding for other people, they might go, "Oh, this is great. This is a open playing field. I can come in and do all sorts of stuff. Or I've got so many years of experience, and I think these are the kind of stuff to do." But helping the individuals flex and develop more of the skills which they're perhaps not so good at just today, and then they can get better at. And that will make you a better, a more efficient team through the process. Right? And then there's the classic stuff, as you said, on the, recognizing when someone is overworking, when someone is disheveled and not performing at their best. Right? Looking at how they are. Some people will literally just tell you, I'm not good. I'm not in a good mood.
Not to put you on the spot here, but say there's somebody that's listening that seems more stressed, maybe checked out of work, knows there might be something going on that they potentially need help with. What's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
That's a phenomenal question. And I think the soundbite for your listeners is, so for me, I have hacked my life to the point of I know where my limits are. I know what works and what doesn't work. And I can educate and teach and help you figure out how to hack and move and find your limits. So that one thing is one thing which you need to find and understand, right? Now, I have certain conditions, and they require me to be able to breathe properly. So through breathing, understanding how my body deals with the breath, that famously in one of the books I'm reading, they talk about you can go without food for so many days, you can go without water for so many hours and days. You can't go without breathing for so long. And now that kind of just hits home with me, and then some of my conditions, and understanding how that breath works, whether I'm oxygen deficient or carbon dioxide deficient or overstimulating one or the other, impacts my brain, impacts my internal nervous system. That's been one of the key things for me, right? And then, as I said, the gym work, so getting myself back into a healthy shape. I'm not, I have no desire to be entering into any sort of competitive, strongman competitions, right? But just having a baseline of being able to go to the gym and do reasonable amount of work, being able to be flexible. When I'm in later, getting into already the latter half of my life, being able to do a lot of that work, right? And understanding my brain. So I do a lot of meditation. Right? I spend a lot of time internalizing, setting my intention and reflecting back. That's religious and cultural kind of thing. You set an intention and you reflect how much did you say to that. So there's that one thing is spirals very quickly, and there's the whole somatic health where everything is connected from head to toe, right? And then everything you do, what you put in your body, whether it's the air, whether it's the food, how much vegetables you be eating, how much protein you be getting, all of that whole gamut is an art, I'd say. I'm sure there's a lot of science. I mean, one of the things that hit the wellness industry big time is glucose monitors. And I'm not diabetic. A lot of my family are, and nothing to do with diabetes at all, but kind of derived from diabetes. We're now looking at sports people and normal non-sports athletic people wearing glucose monitors to understand what happens during the day on their glucose levels, the sugar spikes, and how does that impact their well-being.
I think you're right. There's obviously different things are going to work for different people. And I think two things you mentioned are part of my big three, I'd say. I think paying for a very good therapist, getting fit and getting strong, and meditating. I think for me, that's kind of changed my life, to be honest with you. But Adil, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing everything. And hopefully this is useful to someone out there.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you for having the conversation, buddy.
No worries. Have a good one.